Danke, Ilja. Guten Abend und vielen Dank für den herzlichen Empfang. Ich habe viele deutsche Piloten getroffen und ihr Englisch ist immer besser als mein Deutsch. So it will be better if I continue in English. I would like to talk to you today about IFALPA and later perhaps with you about IFALPA. I could tell you that it is the only global voice of professional pilots, that it represents more than 100,000 professional pilots in more than 100 countries. I could tell you that it has built an unrivaled reputation as the foremost safety and technical organization in civil aviation. And I could tell you it is the voice of professional pilots at ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization. But that would be a description. What I would like to talk to you about is what it means for all of us in a practical sense as pilots. So I'd like to look at one or two practical challenges and where IFALPA fits into that picture. There's always a lot of debate, and more so recently, over flight time limitations, the regulations which should protect us and our passengers from pilots working when fatigued. IFALPA was the organisation through which we argued that the old ICAO requirement just to have FTL rules was deficient. We successfully argued that those rules should be based on scientific principles and knowledge. So those words were included in ICAO Annex 6, Chapter 4, Paragraph 10.1, for those who still need pointing in that direction. This was what Vereinigung Cockpit and the other ECA members argued as the European institutions sought to harmonise European FTL schemes. It does not provide all the answers, but it gave a real edge to the argument that EASA should include the scientists in the drafting process for the rules. So from February next year, some work that IFALPA did a few years ago will affect every pilot in Europe every day that they go to work. The rules are not perfect. They are always going to be some form of compromise, but they would be much worse without the work over the years at IFALPA, ECA, and VC level. There are other examples of real tangible benefits in the technical field, which have only been possible through the work at IFALPA. RVSM at 1,000-foot levels in China, as opposed to a lesser metric distance, was an IFALPA initiative negotiated directly with the Chinese authorities. Safety management systems, which are not well understood now, would be even less well implemented if it wasn't for the extensive work undertaken by IFALPA with IATA, the airlines organization, and ICAO, to write the tripartite guide. Again, not perfect, a compromise, but a much better compromise than without IFALPA involvement. So I've talked about IFALPA as a safety and technically focused organization, but I don't see IFALPA as a purely technical organization. That is the most important activity for our reputation, our credibility with ICAO, but I see IFALPA as the pilot's global advocate, arguing our case on whatever topic is necessary to protect and develop our profession. The latest area which ICAO has been asked by its members, the countries and states around the world, it's been asked to act is to develop a draft multilateral air transport agreement. This would potentially remove or modify the generally accepted requirement for airlines to be majority owned and effectively controlled in the territory whose route rights they wish to use. This has brought significant benefits for air safety over the years, as every airline has a clear and indivisible link with their regulator. We have seen in Europe, for example with Primera Air and Norwegian Air International, among others, that the ability to choose which country you are based in means a degradation of both safety margins, as the regulators suddenly realize that they need to become more friendly in order to retain their income stream, and employment security, as the companies seek to find the cracks between the country's employment regulations to exploit their employees. So, safety oversight, employees, tax and social security, social charge collectors, as well as good employers, all lose out from such forum shopping. IFALPA is at the table in these discussions as they're taking place in Montreal, at the international level, and through our member associations such as VC. In fact, VC is a shining example of how to influence the national debate at the international level. The international debate at the national level. We are seeking allies for our arguments and will seek to ensure that any draft agreement will respect the value brought about by a tight link between the country of designation and the airlines they designate for both safety and employment. You may wonder how esoteric arguments over international agreements and route rights affects the pilots as they go about their job flying safely from A to B. I often explain it this way: air transport agreements are effectively about the jobs and who gets them. It used to be that only a German airline could fly between Hamburg and Munich, so the German government decided which pilots could be employed to fly aircraft on that route. Since 1997, any EU airline can fly, and so any EU national or anyone allowed by any EU government can fly planes between Munich and Hamburg. Imagine if any airline anywhere in the world could operate that route with any pilot. Does that put German and European jobs, pilot jobs, under threat? I think it does. I also wanted to talk about Germanwings 9525. There is not a professional pilot on the planet who does not hold out the hand of friendship to all German flight crew at this moment. And of course, our first thoughts are with the family, colleagues and friends of the pilots, crew and passengers who were involved. IFALPA stands ready to help in any way it can, and just recently at our annual conference, a statement expressing that support, drafted with your own representatives, was unanimously supported by delegates from all over the world. IFALPA was heavily involved in the development of Annex 13, which makes it absolutely clear that CVR, cockpit voice recorder, flight data recorder, and private medical and personal records shall not be disclosed except where necessary as part of an interim or final accident report. Clearly, the French authorities have not recently read their copy of Annex 13, to which they are signed up, or Article 14 of the 2010 EU regulation on accident investigation, which is binding law in the EU. Ignoring long-established best practice for accident and incident investigation is damaging not just for the particular accident under investigation, but it puts at risk future victims of tragedies which might have been avoided with a properly conducted investigation, producing thoughtful, comprehensive and effective recommendations, not knee-jerk reactions. Apologies for the English idiom there. We all know that as professionals. How do we communicate it better to those who do not seem to? The next part of my comments are more personal. As those who have worked with me know, I like to find consensus on the issues, and though I sometimes hold strong views, it is the consensus view which I believe is the most important. So as a new president, these following views will be modified by the conversations, debates, and conclusions reached with the appropriate group of people. So looking again at these three issues I've used to illustrate IFALPA's work, which happens only in close partnership with your regional and national associations, and how it has a meaningful impact on the work of the professional pilot here in Germany, I asked myself the question, is it as good as it can be? Could we make the work more effective or more efficient? Our world in aviation is changing, that is often said, but I would argue it's becoming less structured. There are different business models, a more aggressive approach to regulation. There are multinational airlines, like all of the larger airlines that VC here represents, part of multinational groups. And governments have sometimes forgotten the infrastructure nature of the airline business. We are a necessary service to enable other parts of our economies to grow and prosper. So I believe IFALPA must also change to keep up with the industry and sometimes get out ahead of the industry. We need to be imaginative about how we recruit and serve new members. I said IFALPA represents over 100,000 pilots, but estimates of the number actually working around the world vary around 300,000 or so. We need to ensure we retain our credibility by ensuring all professional pilots have access to the IFALPA family. In the technical safety field, the structure of our committees means that some subjects, like, for example, remotely piloted aircraft, which cross the committee boundaries, need stronger leadership from the IFALPA board, ensuring that not just the technical challenges of either keeping them separate from manned aviation or integrating them safely with manned aviation, that those technical discussions are complemented by real discussions on what sort of a threat they are to our profession, or are they a development of it? If they're a development, how do we properly integrate and represent the RPAS pilots' views? Other subjects such as fatigue risk and safety management and the multi-crew pilot license have not always had a comprehensive discussion as to their impact on all areas of our profession. So I wish to better integrate the leadership of both the IFALPA board and that at national level with the technical expert discussions in the committees and show more leadership in driving those discussions. I also believe that IFALPA needs to develop and lead the national and regional debates on air services agreements, equipping those member associations which need support with the material they need to influence their governments before and during debates in Montreal, at the ICANN negotiators discussions, and in bilateral negotiations. Quality jobs are at risk in a safety-damaging, employment-destroying race to the bottom unless we do. I also believe we need to be proactive in not just influencing what is written in the Chicago Convention annexes, such as Annex 13 on accident investigation. We need to, in a coordinated and IFALPA-led coalition of pilot associations from around the world, ensure that the regulations are then followed, so that no member association's pilots have to suffer the experiences you have had here in Germany over the last few weeks. This will all need leadership from IFALPA, the commitment from your regional and national leadership, such as Dirk Polacek, a German president of ECA, and Ilya, and their opposite numbers across the world to work together to ensure that the most professional of professions, the most successful profession in commerce, I've never left one up there yet, will continue to lead the most exciting industry to an ever safer, ever more successful future. Thank you.
At this point, first, thank you very much for giving us an insight of your views about what's up next and what is happening presently. When you were talking about the jobs, I liked when you said that we are at the table with the stakeholders, because I remember somebody saying in IFALPA, I don't know who it was, Mark Seal was the one, he always says, if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu, and we definitely don't want that. So thank you very much for convincing us of that, and then you give us a little view, actually a little questions of what you think are the challenges in the future, at the end. And I know some of them have not been completely discussed, not in our association, not in IFALPA yet, so there's probably not a perfect position and solution for it. But if you would, I'd really love to hear a little about your views, your ideas, how we can face them. If you would be my pleasure. After that, we still have a little time. I'll give it to you so you can have a few questions toward Martin if you want. Thank you.
So the challenges ahead, I think the biggest challenge that we face is a change in our industry that some governments have stopped seeing their airline industry as a national asset, as part of their infrastructure, their provision to commerce in their country in general, and have tried to portray it as just another business where you allow companies to come and go, you allow failure, to allow the market to keep everything sharp. You've heard those arguments made, and I think if you are a manufacturer of a commodity, those arguments probably apply reasonably well. But when you provide what is a part of the ability to do business, then governments, I think, are forgetting the impact that can have. I think if you look at Hungary, Belgium a few years ago, where the national airline was taken away overnight, and you ask those countries whether they think in retrospect more could have been done, I think they would say more could have been done. That there are many costs to not having an industry that serves your economy. Where you draw the line is interesting. We in Europe have chosen to take the line from around each of our individual nations and draw it around the outside of the EU, or even a little wider. That's a debate. So long as we protect the industry within that market, maybe it was a good idea. We're geographically relatively small. But it is about protecting the industry, because there are countries who have moved in the opposite direction, who now have taken the view that their airline industry is an integral part of their commerce going forward. And although I don't speak very much German, I'm guessing that's partly what you were talking about prior to my keynote. So that, I think, is an interesting place for us to be. And if we move away from ownership and control restrictions, I think that will have a massive effect on our business, because it will allow the sort of Norwegian International, the Ryanair construct for our profession. And although some parts of the pilot world are still very strong, and I would characterize Germany as being one of those parts, it is hard for a good employer in a good country to compete when their direct competition is allowed to cheat. And that, I think, is the bottom line, and that's what we have to persuade our governments together. And it doesn't matter how effective the German Pilots Association is at persuading the German government, if the German government is one on their own when it comes to arguing within Europe or in Montreal, then the argument will be lost. So we need to spread that expertise into other associations so that we can be much more coordinated. It will also have a knock-on effect in the technical arena because, for example, the question of airborne image recorders in the cockpit is coming back this autumn. There is suggestion that airlines will be forced to retrofit cameras in the flight deck. You guys have just been through a very difficult period following an aviation accident with a German airplane. Can you imagine if there had been a camera in the cockpit? Would we learn any more from that? But what damage could that have done? It's a horrible thought. One of the challenges, though, when that subject comes to Montreal, it may well already be mature if the states have already made up their minds. So for IFALPA to be effective in Montreal, we must ask all of our MAs to be effective at national level in making sure the states, when they arrive in Montreal, are already aware of the downside. And one of the things I would argue, there have been a number of accidents where accident investigation branches, units, have argued that pilots should be able to see their own aeroplane. And if you've got the money to fit a camera, fit it in the tail so that we can see our aeroplane. And then we might avoid the accident rather than have to pick up the pieces afterwards. So if they've got money for a camera, I can think of a better place to put it. I suspect actually the money could be better spent elsewhere. Training, maybe alleviating fatigue. There are a number of areas where I think there are better places to spend the money. I was a bit rambly there, sorry.
I think what you've been saying in the end was that whatever we want to achieve on the international level, whether it is on the international level, IFALPA, international level, ECA, it all comes down to we have to do our work in our associations. And we have to stick together throughout the different associations within the world. It all comes down back to one word, solidarity. And that means we have to start that here in VC. We have to start solidarity here. We have to live within our group, and then we have to spread it over with the other associations around the world. And if we don't take our interests in our own hands, guys, it's not going to happen. Maybe something more to Martin Schock? If not, I suppose you have answered all questions people have in mind just by talking to them. Thank you very much, Martin, for being here. I do have a little something for you. You'll now have all the power of VC in your hand when you are it. You know what I mean.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. And if you want to talk to Martin Schock and you're just too shy to do it in public, I know you're going to stay until tomorrow morning. So he will be here during the break. He will be here during the evening. You'll still have the chance. Thank you very much, Martin Schock.
Thank you.